Hey everyone, it's Matthew from AudioKit, and it's my honor today to interview Geert Bevin, head of software at Moog Music. And he is one of the finest music software developers in the entire world. He's built some of the best synth emulations ever created. He's been a TEDx speaker and so much more. He has a commitment to open source, and he even helped Roger Linn build the Linstrument. He dropped so much great advice in this video, I want to get right to it.
Hi, I'm Geert Bevin. I'm the software engineering manager at Moog and also in charge of the software products. You probably know our iOS apps the best, but we also have the editors that work with our synths and also the more advanced synthesizers like the Moog 1 that have a lot of digital features. So you've got a really cool team that has been working on that.
And as the audience can see, even though we're in the same city, we are socially distancing, which we think is important. Do you want to tell people just what you guys are working on right now at Moog and what you're excited about?
Yeah, we've been porting the Model 15 app to macOS. So we've been evaluating Catalyst when it was released, even for the Intel versions. And it didn't really feel like it was ready yet at the time. There were still a few problems with how audio units would integrate. So we've been working on a port of the Model 15 app since Apple Silicon came out. So we got a few of the developer transition kits, started working on it. Interestingly, the first version basically ran after a few hours of work, which was like, whoa, that is pretty fucking awesome. That went so smooth, we actually went back and revisited our plans to port it to Intel with Catalyst. And we're also releasing it on Intel Macs as long as they run Big Sur. So Model 15 will be released on all Macs that are running Big Sur. It runs better on the Apple Silicon versions though, but still, it runs really well. And then we've been figuring out what it means to move an iOS app to the macOS environment, basically. But what doesn't work, what does work, which changes do we need to make, what does it mean to be a good macOS citizen? So yeah, that's what we're currently finishing, and I'm really excited about it.
That is super excited, and I think people have been asking for Mac versions of these amazing emulations. I tell people all the time that I think Model D and Model 15 are the best synth emulations I've heard on any platform.
Oh, thank you.
It's just really outstanding because there's been clones before on platforms that, they were fine, but when I use your versions, you just get that feeling, this indescribable tone that's a Moog.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on that. It's been a lot of years in the work. Just we had people specifically working on the sound engine, the individual components that make up that sound engine, trying to figure out if we want to do component level modeling or a little bit coarser grained. We went for a little bit coarser grained because it allowed us to do some optimizations and also basically more easily capture the characteristics of each module or each section of the synth, and then spend a lot of time imagining what it feels like to use a Moog synthesizer. The sound is one part, but it's also how do you translate the feeling of turning a knob or patching a cable to a touchscreen? And that took a lot of effort from the whole team to figure out how it works visually, how the gestures behave, how the entire interaction model works. So yeah, I'm really happy that you like it so much.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to hear too that how it's not just about the DSP, it's a holistic experience. The musicianship, it's the UI, it's the feeling.
Yeah, the DSP is actually just a really small portion of it. I mean, it's a hard one. It's a difficult one to nail, and the slightest little difference in math will have a profound impact. But it's not the one we spent the most time on. We really spent the most time on the interaction model, and I have this memory that always comes back. I was still like working from Belgium at that point, and so we shipped a vintage Model 15 all the way to Belgium. Little anecdote, came there, but it was only like built for 110 volts, so I couldn't even use it. It's like, okay, I got to get a voltage transformer and set that up, and I did that wrongly, and then the fuse blew, and I had to find the same fuse. Anyway, so I finally got that Model 15 vintage synthesizer up and running, and then it was like I really went through the entire process of learning how to calibrate it, learning how the individual modules work together, and also how you use it as a modular synthesist. And for many weeks, a big part of the job was having an iPad open, having the Model 15 open, turning it up, closing your eyes, and like, okay, how does this, what feeling does this provide? Like, which responsiveness, which tactile experience? Now, obviously, that can be the same on a touchscreen, but how close can you get? Like, what is necessary to still create that feedback loop where the knob becomes part of the instrument and not just a control widget that you don't want to interact with? So that was a lot of work. And then in like, might be surprising, but we spent probably 6 months with two people just doing the cables. The cables were so hard. I never thought it would. No, actually, three people. Like I never thought that the cables would be so hard, because we wanted them to feel realistic, but you basically have a 2D projection of a three-dimensional experience. And the whole problem of how cables overlap and that they still should look realistic, and for it to feel smooth and immediate, and have them physically fall in a way that has some weight to it and that you feel that they are actual cables, man.
Oh gosh.
That was so much work.
Well, it sounds like it paid off. And I guess people might be watching this and think, well, how does a guy from Belgium get to work for, you know, the best synth company in the world? Like, do you have any advice for people out there who want to work for a company like Moog on what they should learn and what they should be doing right now?
There's a lot of advice. There's various aspects to the job that are not technical that I think are really, really important. Um, so my history is that I've been doing open source for as long as I can remember. I still remember installing Linux from floppy disks. Open source and the community aspect and networking is probably one of the biggest and best skills you can hone for various reasons. First of all, being used to diving into a huge code base that you've never seen before and fixing your bug, even if you only do it once, but if you do it on 10 different projects, it allows you to be familiar with different coding styles, different architectures, different approaches, and not be intimidated by hundreds of thousands of lines of code, having to find that one thing that you want to work on. So I think that's very important, not being intimidated by that, because down the line, that's what you'll be doing most of the time. Like, not writing a feature, but maintaining a feature, or joining a team that has already built a product that has all the warts and deficiencies of a product that has been around for many years. Like, it always ends up ugly. You can try for it to be not horribly ugly, but it's always gonna be ugly. Like,
Yeah.
whatever you thought was awesome is not awesome in 3 years, or you did have a deadline and you need to like get something done, and even though you don't want to, you like don't write a test, or you don't document it as well, or you don't do the abstraction that would be appropriate anyway. So that's one big piece of advice, is
Open source, get involved
open
with the government.
source and community, the networking. Then
And conferences when things open up again?
Yes, and conferences. So that's once things open up again, go to conferences and get drunk with people. Sorry to say that, but it's important. It's like it builds relationships, and you do things that are not engineering related. You craft these relationships with people in the industry that make them think of you, where you're like, oh, I've met that guy in in that conference, and he seemed like a cool guy. We had fun. Let's see if he's available. Like you stand out from the pack. Um, so that's the big part. And then don't be shy. So the reason why I started working in Moog is like I've done that in a few times over my career. Like don't wait to apply or craft relationship with your dream job immediately. Like do it for anything that you think might be interesting, so that you sort of hone these relationship skills and technical skills that might not be exactly what you want to do. So don't be shy. What I did to join Moog, and what I did in previous times before, also when I started working with Roger Linn or with Eigen Labs, or with my career before I was doing music, before I was in the music industry. So for Moog, I was using Animoog with the Eigenharp, an instrument that I worked on also, and it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. So I was like, send messages to Moog, like, hey, could it, like, how it goes. Could you please do that? And then every developer is like, damn, like another issue to put in my issue tracker. Anyway, you know how it goes, right? There's a little bit of pushback, and then it doesn't get done, and then do it again. Eventually, go to a trade show, talk with the people. Things change. You start having a more constructive conversation around it. Um, Next trade show, 6 months later, hey, this is even more broken now because you still haven't fixed it, but other things have happened. Um, and like a long story short, since I was so comfortable with open source and opening up any code base, I basically told them one day, like, you know what? Just send me the source code. Like, I'll sign whatever you want. You don't have to pay me. I'll fix this because I need it to work. And they're like, you're crazy. Like, you want to work for free? It's like, yeah, like, I need this to be fixed. So let's fix it. And and just to be clear, it wasn't like a real bug in Animoog. It was, I wanted it to support voice per channel expressiveness. To me, it felt like a bug, but in reality, it's something that almost no one had ever done before. So I basically wanted to add that feature to the app, because it had it on the screen, and it still has it, where you can express individual control with each finger on the screen. It didn't have a way to do that properly over MIDI. Like, we've now created the MP standard with the whole MIDI community, and there is a way to do that over MIDI in a standard way, but there didn't used to be a way before. So anyway, I wanted to put that in there, and after being really obnoxious for a long time and not giving up and just saying, okay, I'll do it for free, just give me the source code, they finally just agreed to do that, and saw that we worked well together, and I started doing more, and they said, okay, let's now pay you because like it seems only fair. And gradually, like, I was doing that at, like, during the weekends and at night, like, together with my other job, just like doing some tweaks to Filtertron, adding more features to Animo, getting it to work on newer iPads, and eventually, like, well, do you want to join? And I'm like, okay, well, let's do that. So just to highlight, it can, like, it it's more than just sending a resume and hoping that you'll be picked out of the pack. That's a really long shot.
Yeah, that's really excellent advice. And you hit on several things of just adding value, and putting in the work. I mean, because you'll stand out about, there's probably like 1,000 people. And if you're that one person that's willing to do what needs to be done, and, you're a good good to hang out with, a nice person, compassionate, and you're passionate about the product. You truly want to make something beautiful and not just have a paycheck. And I think that's what a lot of companies are looking for.
Yeah, there's something I'm gonna try to remember this, but I might screw it up. Um, I read something somewhere at one point which really struck with me. There's I hope I will not screw it up. Let's try it. So
Okay.
there's like three qualities to work: is you like doing great work, be on time, and be an awesome person, right? So if you do great work and finish it on time, people will be okay with you being a dick, like because the work is done, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you do great work, but you're always a bit late, but you're just super fun, people will be fine. Like, he does the work, it's good. Like, if you do a little bit of shoddy work, but it's always done on time and you're an awesome guy, it's fine. So you really only need two. Now, if you can get all three, just like you said, you stand so much out of the pack that it's really hard to not want to work with you. Just summarized.
Yes, that's really good advice too. And so like as far as like the technology stacks, like what kind of like languages might be good for people to get into for music development?
It's a really good question.
I mean, because everyone just says learn C++ and C and Juice, but there's more that people should be looking
There's
at.
more. Like, you definitely have to learn C++ and C if you want to do DSP. But like we said, DSP is only a part of it. It's not, and not even the biggest part. You can even get away with reusing existing DSP or using libraries like FAUST, libpd, like whatever. Like, there's a lot of open source libraries available now that take care of the DSP for you. Even Juice like has now a whole bunch in the latest Juice version has now a whole bunch of DSP primitives that are actually fairly competent that you can do a lot of things with. Um, I'm gonna go on a tangent here. But one of the things that Roger Linn told me at one point, and it's a very good point. Um, so I've worked with Roger Linn on an instrument that's called Linstrument, which is like a multi-dimensional pad controller, where for each touch you have 3 dimensions of control. What he realized is having very rich and complex DSP processing actually conflicted with the expressiveness of the instrument. So what you really want to get great synthesis sounds that work with an instrument or any expressive controller is you want to turn off as much modulation as you want, as you can. You don't want to have too many evolving soundscapes like that evolve automatically. You don't want to have too much like effects because it will just be like washed away, because that distantiates you from the control aspect and you don't feel as engaged with the sound anymore, because it's up to you with these kind of controllers to infuse the expressiveness into the sound. Now, why did I bring this up? Like, in the iOS realm, you have a very expressive touch interface and you have amazing visuals. So if you come up with an app that has great visuals, that feels good, and you can do interesting things with in terms of gesture control, you can actually use a lot of the DSP primitives that are just readily available and have an amazing app, because you just augment it so much more with the real-time interaction that you can do with the app. So don't get focused on DSP. It's awesome if you can do DSP, but it's only a small part of it. Um, So what are the things that we use? We use Juice. We don't use Juice for any of our iOS apps. Um,
Okay.
it's not at all in there. We've used Juice for the Moog One, for the UI on the Moog One and the general application infrastructure. There's nothing sound related that is going through Juice there. It's only just application infrastructure. Um, we have used Juice for our editors, um, like the synth editors, the Slim Fatty, Sub 37, like all these editors use Juice. Apart from that, we now use, like we've used a lot of Objective-C. Um, we've, for Model 15 and Model D apps, we've used a lot of Metal. So what we ended up doing, because of the graphical nature of those apps, is to build out our own UI framework on top of Metal. So we've got a declarative UI XML file where we can compose relational um, user interfaces that scale and that position elements based on relative sizes and pull the graphical assets from a big texture atlas that goes straight from the texture on disk or on the solid state drive to the GPU in a compressed manner. So that's that whole unified memory architecture, which Apple has also ported to the like used for the M1 and Apple Silicon. So what we do there is specifically for Model 15, and then that architecture we use it for Model D also, and we're going to continue using it for other apps. Model 15, if you've never used it, you can zoom in all the way out and all the way into a giant modular that is very detailed in its graphical elements. It's all hand drawn and all the shading is done by hand to make it look as realistic as possible. But the memory usage of that is just through the roof. So what it needs to be able to do is to fluidly zoom in to a giant texture map and overlay all those controls in the same kind of detail on top of it. The only way we could make that work was thanks to the fact that we could send those texture maps straight to the GPU. And so then we built that framework on top of that. Now, recently, what we've also adopted is Swift and Swift UI for some projects that haven't been released yet. And they are not that graphical in nature, but they're more utilitarian. We waited to adopt Swift until it got more mature. We think it is now in a pretty good state. And Swift UI in particular is awesome. Just how easy it is to create UIs in a maintainable way. You don't get tangled up with who's responsible for state. You have no confusion about how the control of the different state elements and the interaction works together. It always comes from the single source of truth. And then the way it just integrates with Xcode, how you can test individual components, is just so intuitive and productive to work on as a team. So that's a very quick overview of the current technologies.
Yeah, so I guess an important thing that people are probably listening to this and they're realizing these are all Apple-centric technologies. So is there a reason why you haven't
Apart
explored
from
Windows
Juice,
or Linux?
apart from Juice, which I also mentioned, the reason why is because we've currently only released apps on like not the editors. The editors were written, like I told you, were written in Juice, and those are also released on Windows. But the synthesizers, we've only released it for Apple infrastructures. So over the years, I used to be a really big advocate for abstraction layers and frameworks and toolkits that like automagically are supposed to work across different platforms.
A little more agnostic.
Yes. I've gone completely away from that because out of experience, if you want to build an app that not only works, but that feels amazing, I've always ended up having to go down to the lower level libraries. And what you then end up with is you got to pay the technical debt for the additional library that you pulled in or framework that you pulled in. You're beholden to their release schedule for any new features or OS updates. But you also have to deal with platform specific exceptions that you also need to maintain, either by extending classes, forking the code base if you can, having preprocessor macros that change things based on whatever condition. I've always found it to become really messy. That's just me. Um, so with my team, I've sort of decided that we, like, going ahead, and also we've done it for the last few years, we reuse graphical elements, but we use the most productive, up-to-date tools for each platform available. So for that upcoming, those upcoming apps that use Swift UI, we're also working on it on Windows, but there we use XAML. And we use the specific Microsoft tools that do the same thing. And it turns out that I feel that the end result is better, and we spend less time fighting the abstraction layer and just trying to make it as awesome as possible.
Wow. That's interesting. So you're focusing very platform specific for each target.
Yes.
That sounds like you're going to need a big team for something like that.
Well, we've got a great team that is very productive.
So I guess that is a kind of like a little nugget that you just dropped. You are planning on releasing some Moog synths for Windows.
I can't comment on what those apps do.
Okay. But there is the possibility in the future, maybe or maybe not. You have
Maybe,
no
maybe
comments
not.
either way.
I can't comment on the nature of those apps.
Another good question. What are some of the challenges you face, even being like a world-class developer like yourself?
I think one of the biggest challenges is how fast the industry advances. Um, like we just went through this. Like Apple just released 5 new form factors, like 2 new iPads and 3 new iPhones. For each iPhone, there is a standard and a zoom display. So you basically get 8 different screen sizes. Now, and both standalone and in AUV3, that is like 16 different layouts because Apple released devices that don't have the same screen size. Now, we made the decision, and there is no right or wrong here, but we made the decision that we wanted Model 15 and Model D to be skeuomorphic and very photorealistic, which also has the inherent choice that we don't want to scale up graphics.
Yes.
So that means that that particular choice requires us to do a non-neglectable amount of work every time the screen resolution changes. Which, I mean, it pays off. The apps are beautiful and people love them, like you just said. But it does require us to keep up with it. And the problem is that since we use metal so extensively, we can't use a simulator. So we can't even ahead of time make this work. So whenever Apple releases those devices, we basically pre-order them, have to have one of each, and then sit down and make it work on that device. But we're always like behind the curve, which is kind of frustrating because we want it to be available as soon as possible. We never know when those devices are going to come out. We never know like which resolutions are going to change, if they're going to change. So in this case, like this year was pretty intense. Like We were almost done doing the iPads, but all of a sudden the three new iPhones were announced. And so we just released updates for both of the apps, but it was like it was a lot of work trying to shoehorn that into the rest of the schedule. Um,
Yeah, that's a big struggle that, and especially hard for like indie developers that don't have the resources to buy all these devices. And sometimes users are like, well, I just spent, $3,000, your stuff should work. And like
and
we're
like,
in the same boat as you. Like
yeah,
and I just got my M1 machine a couple days ago. And so like it renders stuff differently from the dev boxes. And like,
totally.
just Logic renders AUV3 is different than, iOS. So that's another thing we have to support and account for. And there's like virtually no documentation on like how to do it. So we're just kind of flying blind.
Yeah,
Figure it
I
out.
just went through that. And so since we were porting Model 15, um, we got it to work beautifully on the DTK during the developer transition kits. Basically, using the same assumptions. Like you said, there's a lot of assumptions. A lot of stuff is not documented. So you're just like trying it out, seeing how the AUV3 behaves. And it's like, oh, okay, guess that's it. Guess this is the way it's happening. And then like you remember, right, when AUV3 came out and it's like, oh, they're all running in the same process in one host. Damn it. Now, anything that is global state is really screwed. So like figuring out how to fix that, figuring out how you like handle your DSP engine if you have any global state there. Anyway, so what we went through, same with what you just said, everything was working on DTK. I released the beta for the beta testers, and it was like one of my colleagues just got like a MacBook Air, like the M1, and he's like, "This thing is amazing," and I'm like, "Okay, damn it, I'm gonna buy one." So I bought one for myself because I just wanted to experience this whole new Apple Silicon platform, and I tried it on there in Logic, and everything broke. Turns out that on the M1 and the way Logic hosts AUV3s, in the same project, different instances of the same plugin can get a different buffer size. Which, like, I had one that was getting a callback at 1024 and another at 256. And one of the last pieces of global state that was still being like handling the sound engine for the app was that the buffer size was constant, because used like the callback would just be, okay, you get an audio callback, the buffer size is handled by the host, that is constant, it works. Turns out that's not guaranteed anymore. So like within the same host, like different processes could get different buffer sizes, or if it's wrapped in a different sample rate, there could be sample rate conversion going on. But it never happened that within the same host, you could have different audio callbacks with different buffer sizes, and they could dynamically change. So that was like, damn it. It's like, why is this not working? Why it's sounding so garbled? And basically, like 2 days after the first beta was sent to beta testers, like, okay, I gotta go in and figure out with my team how we fix this. And so we just like scrambled, because we really wanted beta testers to have like a great experience. Scrambled, reworked most of the audio engine so that we could figure out a way to not have any global state anymore. So a lot of things were tied to that, though. Like, in order to save CPU, you pre-calculate some of the things, like based on the sample rate and the buffer size. You might like pre-calculate some of the alphas and lambdas and the the K factors and all of these things. Like, oh, let's just stick them all in global variables so that we have them. Well, we couldn't do that anymore. So,
Wow, yeah. And so for people watching, that's one of the reasons why a lot of the developers are friends, because we all feel the same pain from different platform providers and the people that make our tools. It's just like we're all in this together, and the more knowledge we can share, the better it is for everyone.
yeah, totally. And like one of the frustrating parts is you never know also if you're experiencing the new state of things or a temporary bug. Like, should I now fix this or not? Like, what is going to happen? Like, one of the things we went through last week in one of the new apps we're working on, um, seems that iOS 14.2 had a bug related to MIDI ports. Um, and all of a sudden, everything we were doing, like we were doing a lot of MIDI traffic, and like ports were just disappearing. And specifically, if it was going over Bluetooth, things were just like behaving completely unreliably. And we're like, okay, what is going on? Did we introduce a bug in any of the commits in the last 2 weeks? Because like we had firmware on the instruments running, like the app coordinated with that firmware, like transferring MIDI in a certain like in-house protocol that packages things up. And like, did we mess up somewhere? Turns out it was iOS 14.2, and 14.3 came out a couple of days ago, and all of a sudden everything worked again. So we never know. Like you said, like we were all feeling this pain. It's like, is this bug a real one, or is it our bug? Is it Apple's bug? Is it someone else's bug? Whose bug is it?
That's cool. And you mentioned beta testers. I bet you guys have some of the best beta testers in the industry because you're Moog. Like, who doesn't want to like test out like the new synth software? You'd be like, "Hey, Trent Reznor, how's it going? How's it? How's that?"
Yeah, artists don't make great beta testers.
Oh, interesting.
They have no time. Like, first of all, they have no time. Secondly, they don't want to risk having a setup that doesn't work. Certainly not artists at that level. Um, what we do is once we get through to an almost stable state, we collaborate with artists that create presets or preset packs, but they rarely are available as beta testers. Um, Finding good beta testers is hard, man. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of people just want to get a free license. So one of the things that I've decided doing is I don't curate a beta tester mailing list. I don't,
Oh,
no. Like for each major effort, I'm basically doing a new call for beta testers. Like, who does not want to be involved? It's not because you were involved the last time that you're still getting free stuff. Like, you're a beta tester doesn't mean that you don't have to act like a beta tester. We expect that to be a collaboration. Like beta testing is your opportunity, is the way I see it. It's your opportunity to tell us the things that you want so we can make our apps awesome and include some of the things that you're asking for, or some of the bugs you found, or some of the situations that you want to really work amazingly. So we expect that to be a two-way street. Otherwise, it's basically creating more work for us because we got to keep the communication going. Got to make sure that everyone gets the latest version. We got to like do all of that maintenance stuff. So I basically start from scratch again every time. Like for the Model 15 port, I've started doing, like I started doing that with Model D. I basically put something on social media. It's like, hey, we're working on new stuff at Moog. If you want a beta test, hit me up. And then I make sure that everyone signs an NDA. I make sure that everyone like knows what is expected. And then we have that beta tester team for that effort. If you want to stay involved, then just stay involved.
wow. Sounds like a good way to run it.
I mean, it's just what I've gravitated towards. Like with Animoog, we ended up with like hundreds of people that were just never doing anything. We didn't even get an email from them. Where you're like, why are you still in this? Like,
Yeah.
why do I still have to deal with like making sure that it works on your device? Do you even still have that device? Like, so it became too much of an like a maintenance hassle that I like. An awesome beta tester team of 20 people is incredible. Like compared to a non-reactive beta tester team of 200 people.
Let's switch gears for a second. So, what's it like to be a developer in a town like Asheville? For people that don't know, it's kind of a small town. It's not a big city like San Francisco or Berlin, where there's a concentrated group of developers.
I used to be in Belgium in a little village, which is even worse than Asheville. So I actually like the fact that we can just focus on what we're doing and then have specific points in time where like, oh, hey, there's an event. Let's just mingle and have like and meet people that are like-minded and exchange ideas and collaborate and then do things like hackathons, do things like conferences, do things like just like experimental setups like at like synth or electro events or like these kind of things. And then you just go back and you go back to woodshop, do the things, and I kind of like that experience. I also, and that's just me, like this is really personal. Um, I love to party and I love to just go out and dance and have fun. And Asheville is an amazing city for that. Like, not now because it's COVID, but outside of COVID, like every night, even though it's a small town, every night there's like 5, 6 awesome gigs going on. Even during the week, during the weekends, there's a lot of parties, there's great bars, venues for all types of music or dance or whatever kind of art you're into. So I find that actually more important because it provides inspiration. It like gives these influences that are not technical. Like you can find the technical stuff everywhere. Like there's so much information online. Um, but being inspired is something that doesn't come as easily. So being in an environment that is just like you meet people that are still like weaving like there's this modular artist Bana Hafar. I don't know if you've heard of her. Like we do a lot of like we collaborate a lot with her at Moog. She used to be a bass player and she's now mostly doing modular music. She wrote a whole piece recently where she got inspired by the patterns and rhythms of weaving, like old-fashioned weaving, like the whole like how like all of manual things getting like all of that. I don't know the terminology, but getting all of that in there, like people that are just like super into like manual work, like how do you get artistry across with your hands, and then what does that mean to a musical instrument? How do you build a musical instrument that still has that notion of craftsmanship in it, and that doesn't become just a tool, because a tool is not necessarily inspiring. Like building an instrument that figures out the right constraints, that figures out the right interactive model, that figures out the exact experience and environment and language that you want to provide so that people can take it to the next level. And I think that being in a city like Asheville is very helpful for that.
That's outstanding advice, for people to get outside their comfort zone, not just go to the same technical conferences, but, go meet people that are in other industries and experience other types of events and the inspiration and just the community. It's
Yeah.
just more fulfilling everything.
I get most of my inspiration from non-technical or non-synthesizer things. I still remember like one of the things, I don't know if you've ever used the tutorials in Model 15. We're going to be releasing more very soon, but there's like a whole tutorial language built into Model 15 that people can build their own tutorials with. One of the things that was challenging was like you've got this whole modular panel. How do you indicate that something is happening, but you don't want to automatically scroll there? You want people to be enticed to go towards that. And it took the longest time to figure that out. And the idea came from games. The idea came from, like, I'm a huge gamer also. From you're playing and getting shot at, and you see this little red indicator in your HUD where it's like, hey, the shots are coming from there. And then you're going to turn towards that and it's going to follow you. And then you're like, okay, well, now I'm going towards where the shots are. And the closer you get, the brighter it gets. And so you get this implicit navigation that's built into your HUD. So we adopted that for the tutorials in Model 15. When something is important and highlighted, it will provide this little glow. And the closer you get, the brighter it gets. And all of a sudden you see the thing and that whole thing is highlighted. So just as an illustration that was inspired by something that is totally unrelated to synthesizers or music.
And it's moving away from that whole skeuomorphic
Yes.
one-to-one thing.
Yeah.
And I know Roger Linn is a big proponent of that. So some of that inspiration may have come from him too. And the whole MPE, where it's not just ones and zeros, ons and offs. We're using
Yep.
everything.
Everything.
Yeah. Something that I think a lot of people want to know right now is, like, what does Apple Silicon really mean for the future of iOS music software? I mean, you're an industry leader, so if Moog does it, I think a lot of people will follow and kind of expect it. So I think you guys are in a unique position where you could change the direction faster or sooner of the industry.
Well, I don't really know how to answer this without giving away our roadmap, which I can't.
Okay.
However,
I guess your personal thoughts,
my
maybe.
personal thoughts are that I'm incredibly excited. Even if it's just for the technical prowess that the M1 is. If if you haven't used an Apple Silicon machine yet, this is the first time in the last 10 years that I'm actually ecstatic when I use this computer. Like,
It's exciting. You know, I just got mine. I'm
it's
like, this is the coolest laptop I've ever owned.
it's
I'm never get
incredible.
excited about buying laptops.
I have the base level MacBook Air. It cost me $1,000, and it outperforms the 16-inch MacBook Pro Intel, fully specced out, that I got 3 months ago. There's no fan. So as a musician, I'm like, what? It doesn't heat up like crazy. So I can just sit in the couch and my legs aren't burning. Like, that's just, maybe that's not really related to how you, like, the capabilities of the product you develop, but that has gotten me so excited about a laptop again, which hasn't happened in so long. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what else can I do with laptops? Now, technically, I think the fact that Apple now has, or is going to have, even more computers that use unified memory architecture and the complete system on a chip, where, and this is just my opinion, right? Like, I think one of Apple's strengths has been that they own the whole stack. A lot of people give them, like, criticisms for it, but what it has allowed them to do is to focus on vertical solutions that work as best as possible. Like, develop the software with the tools, with the OS, with the hardware, and make sure that you can be in sync, as much in sync as possible. Obviously, that will always fluctuate, and, like, you know how it goes. Once there's more than one person involved, communication gets skewed. So it's like, we're not machines. So even though Apple is a big company, they screw up, just like everyone screws up. We all screw up. So, but what it did allow them to do is to have this very opinionated approach and these very opinionated solutions that try to work as well as possible. Now, having that architecture, that, like, hardware architecture that they build out on iOS, and that, like, made the iPads are incredibly powerful, and all that knowledge is available in the computers, but the approach is the same. You've got a unified memory architecture that allows you to do things like I just explained earlier, like just pass on huge graphical assets without having to hold them in memory on the CPU and the GPU. Um, Being able to leverage all of these things, like being able to leverage accelerate and neon optimizations in your DSP and get like leverage all of the work that Apple has done in that regard is just so exciting.
So powerful. And, people ask us every day, like, why do you focus Apple-centric? And you probably get this question. It's because of that vertical integration. We can provide a better experience
Yes.
quicker to market.
What I'm excited about also is like, how can iOS devices and computers now better integrate? They each have their strengths. And there's a reason why the MacBook Pros haven't got a touchscreen. There's a reason why iPads don't have a keyboard. They, they, they're different form factors that you use in different ways. Um, so I'm really interested in figuring out what that means. Like having an iPad together with fanless computers in a studio, and how this can augment possibilities for music makers.
And by the time people see this, Model 15 will be out. And will that be available in the App Store, or will they have to go to like a special site to download it?
It's a universal app. If you've got the license for iOS, you get it for free.
Wow.
So yeah, through the App Store. And it's available as an AUV3 also and standalone.
So that's an interesting business decision too, because people would gladly pay extra to have it on desktop, but you
It
got
would,
to give
but
it away.
a lot of people would also be frustrated. There's other concerns there which we think are more important than money. Um, One of the visions of Model 15 and Model D is you can share your presets and banks. You can also integrate with like iCloud Drive. And we think that the vision of being able to work on something mobile and then take it into your studio and be able to use the same presets, work with the same app, and have that seamlessly transition is so much more powerful than any financial concerns. So being able, like, if this is the same app and if this is identified as the same, uh, like, if this has the same identifier in the App Store, then inherently all of the iCloud integration is implicit. So the whole flow is much more fluent, which we think is super powerful and important.
Right. Well, I don't think people have realized the power of this yet. You could basically, be on a train, start an idea on the Model 15, then go home to the studio and, load it up in Logic as a plugin
Yes,
into your Logic project.
yes,
Yeah, for the same price.
yes.
It's like
It's,
really democratizing music making for everyone. Like these incredible tools.
we all benefit from this. We think music makes people's lives better. It like it provides means of creativity and expression that is very necessary in modern life. Like it's always been necessary, but in the last, let's say, 50 years, our lives have become so much more stressful that being able to be creative and um, feel like you're part of your own creative process through music is so important for people that we want to make sure that everyone can experience that um, for like an affordable price. And at the same time, it also educates people. Like it allows people to learn what a Model 15 synthesizer is, learn about the history, get started with modular synthesis, and then maybe if they're really into it, buy a hardware instrument. Not necessarily Moog, could be anyone, but like it's a continuum. Um, so we think that that is just an ongoing story, it's not about the singular purchase price. It's about just allowing people to have instruments that are very inspiring and allow them to like lead better lives, basically.
Yeah, that's it's very profound. And I think it's a great role model for other companies to aspire
But
to.
this is one of the things we firmly believe at Moog, and it might not be that visible behind, like, outside of the company, but we have a few very profound things that we operate upon, and they're fully respectful of Bob Moog's ideals, and they like we firmly believe these things. Sometimes, like, we sometimes get criticism for, like, some of the instruments might be like more expensive than other instruments, but we spend so much time on it. It's like, if we would be able to make them cheaper, we would. It's just like, financially sometimes it's really not possible, and going for certain materials or small runs or uh, more creative solutions to certain approaches just makes things exponentially more expensive. um, it's just the way it is.
Is there anything else you want to say to people about, future of software development, about Moog, about?
Just as a programmer, and if you're a programmer and you're listening, you've got one of the most amazing jobs out there. Like, this is something that I still feel every day. We're so incredibly fortunate that we can be expressive in so many different domains, and both in the virtual world and the real world. If you've never done anything on hardware, I really, really think you should get an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi or like a tiny little device and experience how your code can interact with the real world. If you've never gone through that experience, it's really profound. And it might give you an idea of how far reaching your skills as a programmer are. Like, if you really stand still and think about what software is, almost everything that surrounds us nowadays is driven by software. Um, and as a software engineer, I actually don't like this term software engineer, but I prefer talking about us like as a software gardener, because that's what we do. We tend to the software and make it grow and make it beautiful and make sure that even if there's like some bad weather or some misfortunes that happen, we still try to make it grow as best as possible, because we always have to do that. We always have to, like, trim the bonsai tree. um, so as a software gardener, you have the power to take an inanimate object and make it into something inspiring. You can infuse the soul into something that's just a piece of metal. That to me is so powerful. And if you think about that and all the far reaching consequences that this has, and that opens up to you as a person and a human, I think that, like, we're living in such an exciting time.
Wow, that's really inspiring. And yeah, Gardner, I haven't heard that analogy, but we're all here to foster things and create and work with
Mhm.
other people and come together and hopefully create things bigger than ourselves.
Exactly.
Excellent. And so for people who, I guess, want to learn more about Moog or someday working for Moog, is there a way they can get in touch with you, or what should they do?
We have a forum, like, we're present on social media. Just reach out to us, write us an email, like, send us a tweet. Like, it's not difficult to get in touch with people
Yeah,
nowadays.
very personal, very nice. So Cool stuff.
Thank
All
you,
right, cool.
Matthew.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And
Cool. By the way, if you guys have, I hope WWDC will still happen again one year. If you guys have never been, you should, because it's one of the most amazing conferences that you can go to. If you do any kind of iOS or macOS development, the developers at Apple that are coding all of the things are actually there and pull up their laptops and go through it with you, which is unbelievably like useful. One of the challenges was that this touched on so many teams at Apple that it was really hard to get that to be assessed. But for instance, like when we were at WWDC, we could just pull up the computer and just, okay, here I'm sitting with the core audio guy and the guy that's in charge of Xcode profiling and the other guy that's in charge of metal and like just and the one that writes the graphics drivers, and just sit together and like, okay, how does this all trace through the entire stack? Which, like, I've never had that happen in any of the conferences that I've been to. So just on a side note, if you can make it to WWDC, it's just incredible. It's also like a fun crowd and a fun city to go to.
AudioKit is a free and open source project. You can learn more at audiokitpro.com.